Diabetes Insipidus by Grayson Holman and Kennedy Calhoun. Diabetes insipidus is caused by a lack of antidiuretic hormone or a lack of response to antidiuretic hormone, which results in excessive water in the urine. This then leads to excessive urination and thirst.
Normal physiology. ADH is stimulated by impulses from the hypothalamic neurons in response to increased blood solute, concentration, or decreased blood volume. The ADH is transported from the hypothalamus down the axons of the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract to the posterior pituitary gland. The pituitary gland releases the ADH into the blood as the action potential arrives at the axon terminals in the posterior pituitary. ADH then travels through the blood and goes into the kidneys. The part of the kidney that ADH acts on is the collecting duct. ADH binds onto V2 receptors, which are located on the basolateral membrane of the duct. In the diagram, the V2 receptors are green. Both the basolateral and apical membrane already contain aquaporins, which in the diagram are blue. But when the ADH binds to the V2 receptors, it causes the cell to insert additional aquaporins onto its apical membrane. Aquaporins are channels that allow water to pass freely from the fluid urine through the collecting duct and to get reabsorbed into the blood. The increased insertion of aquaporins into the apical cell membrane allows water to flow through the cell quicker and in heavier volumes. While the aquaporins are what allow the water to pass through the ducts, the actual force that pushes the water is the osmotic gradient, as the water is forced from areas of high to low concentration. So the binding of ADH causes water to be reabsorbed into the blood, lowering the blood solute concentration. It therefore lowers the amount of water that the kidney makes into urine, which increases the blood volume.
Pathophysiology. There are four main types of diabetes insipidus. First is cranial. This is when the hypothalamus does not produce ADH for the pituitary to secrete. Second is nephrogenic. This is when the kidney does not respond to the ADH hormone. Third is gastrogenital. It is a rare condition and it only occurs during pregnancy. An enzyme produced by the placenta destroys the ADH that the mother produces. The fourth is primary polydipsia. This causes large amounts of diluted urine, and the underlying cause is excessive fluid intake, which causes damage to the third circulatory system in the hypothalamus. For the sake of this project, we will only be focusing on cranial and nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. When ADH is either not produced or not responded to, the additional aquaporin is not inserted into the cell membrane, and therefore the water is not able to be reabsorbed into the blood. That water then goes into the urine, which results in excessive production of dilute urine and an increase in the blood solute concentration.
Risk factors. The risk factors for nephrogenic. The first risk factor is drugs, such as lithium. They can have a negative effect on the kidneys, such as desensitizing the kidney's ability to respond to ADH. The second risk factor is a genetic abnormality mutation in the AVPR2 gene on the X chromosome. It affects the V2 receptors that bind ADH. The third risk factor is chronic kidney disease. It damages the kidneys and it can cause a lack of response to ADH. The fourth risk factor is an electrolyte imbalance, particularly hypokalemia, which is low potassium, or hypercalcium, which is high calcium, are thought to interfere with the post-receptor actions of ADH on the permeability of collecting ducts. Risk factors for cranial are idiopathic, which means without any clear cause, or any type of trauma to the brain that may damage the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland.
Symptoms. The first symptom is excessive urination. This is because water is not being absorbed into the blood and is being discarded into the urine. The next symptom is excessive thirst and dehydration. This is due to the excessive water loss. The third symptom is orthostatic hypotension, and this is caused by the dehydration. Finally, the last symptom is hypernatremia, or high concentration of sodium in the blood, and this we discussed previously and is due to the increase in the blood solute concentration.
Prevalence. Diabetes insipidus is such a rare disorder that it was very hard to find any sort of prevalence. However, we did find that in Canada, around 4,876 out of 507,874 individuals suffer from diabetes insipidus.
Key concepts. The first key concept is proteins, and the proteins that we discussed were the osmotic receptors in the hypothalamus, the V2 protein receptors, and the aquaporin, which allowed the passageway of water. Next is the cell membrane. The two cell membranes were the basolateral and the apical, which were located on the collecting duct. In relation to these, ADH binds to the V2 receptors that are present on the basolateral cell membrane. Aquaporin is always present on both cell membranes, but when ADH binds, it causes the insertion of additional aquaporin into the apical cell membrane, which is how water gets reabsorbed into the blood. The last key concept is homeostasis. Homeostasis is disrupted due to the inability of water to be reabsorbed into the blood, which again results in excessive production of dilute urine and an increase in the blood solute concentration.